Hey, you conscious seekers. Today we're going to be talking about psychic abilities and healing trauma. I really wanted to jump on and share with you guys a little bit of non-traditional way to heal trauma. It's something that a lot of people wouldn't even consider that psychic abilities can help heal trauma. But in my years of teaching students how to develop their psychic and mediumship abilities and watching what happens afterwards and seeing how their life transforms and years later, because I swear I stay connected with you guys forever because it's such a life transformation that happens during the process that I've seen so many people heal their trauma. And I've even had some previous students come on here and talk about you would be surprised that developing your psychic abilities can help heal trauma. And so on this episode of the Craving Consciousness podcast, I'm going to share exactly how this happens so that you can have a greater understanding of psychic abilities and a greater understanding of your trauma and how you can heal it. So let's dive right in. So when you have psychic abilities, what happens is you open up this whole new energy world. You're opening up your energetic receptors. So your psychic seeing, your psychic hearing, your psychic physical feeling, your psychic emotional feeling, and your knowing. You open these receptors up and you're connected to a whole other realm that you never have been. So really it helps with not getting distracted as much. Your psychic abilities will completely change your relationship dynamics because when you develop your seeing, hearing, feeling, knowing, and you exercise these abilities, you are able to read people, you are able to read energy, and you're able to start recognizing different behaviors. The neat thing about psychic abilities is that you can, at least in my experience, you can look at somebody and even the shape of their body will tell you what their personality is like. And you'll know if you want to engage with this person's energy anymore. And you were going to start noticing that with the people that you already have relationships with, your relationship dynamics completely change. And how does that heal trauma? It heals trauma because you start recognizing people in a different way. You start realizing the roles that people play in each other's lives. When I did psychic readings, people would come to me and be like, is this the one? Is this the man? But in reality, it comes down to the relationship dynamics and it comes down to reading the actual person. That's for another podcast episode though. Um, your psychic abilities and opening up to this new awareness also helps you create a new relationship with yourself. You start recognizing yourself in a new light. A new identity shows up. You actually start becoming someone else, someone that you've always wanted to be, but you were too scared, right? Because when you're opening up your psychic abilities, one of the biggest things that people freak out about is like, are all these people around me going to think I'm crazy and losing my mind? And a lot of people, when you're opening up your psychic abilities, you do feel like you're crazy and you do feel like you're losing your mind. But once you realize that all this is real, you're not making this stuff up, you're really making these connections, then you're able to start standing in your identity as who you used to be and as who you are now becoming. And you're able to love yourself enough where you're not going to be people pleasing as much. This is relationship dynamics again, but it really starts with yourself and your own behavior. Your behavior changes. This is all healing trauma, healing past trauma, and it's also healing yourself so that you're not going to experience future trauma or having that repetitive cycles, the repetitive relationships, your repetitive behavior, right? When we get these psychic abilities and we work in the spirit world, you start to experience more joy on purpose because you're standing in your identity, because you're not afraid to be who you are. You're a new becoming. It's a new becoming. It's amazing. When you develop your psychic abilities and your mediumship, especially, you have a greater understanding of life and death. You have a greater understanding of death. I mean, when we're talking about trauma, that's probably one of the number one ways for you to experience trauma is losing a loved one. That's a huge traumatic event. It tears a huge piece of you apart. But when you're having these psychic abilities and you're working with spirit world, you understand, yeah, it still hurts like hell when you lose your human, right? But you understand the afterlife because you work with the afterlife. You work with this invisible realm of beings, guides, angels, past loved ones, light beings, right? Ancestors. So you can have more peace with death, whether it's having more peace with death that's already happened when you develop your psychic abilities, or whether it's having more peace around death does not even sound like the right thing to say, but having a better understanding about death, and it doesn't hurt as bad as maybe somebody that doesn't understand it. When we develop our psychic and mediumship abilities, we're a huge light for people that are suffering in that place. And it's the greatest blessing in the world to be able to have a past loved one come through for someone and see the healing happen for that person when they realize that you're not making this stuff up. These are things that you couldn't have possibly known. You are literally communicating with their past loved one. They find so much peace. Well, when you're that person, when you're the psychic, when you're the medium, you can also communicate with your past loved ones in a greater aspect. But you know in your heart of heart that this is a process. This is the cycle of life, right? So understanding, you also understand a greater understanding of life contracts and why people leave. It's freaking painful. I'm thinking of a couple people that I've worked with, and even myself losing my late husband. Understanding that his contract was up, our contract was up, and it has helped me move on in my life, and find more peace as I do move on in my life, because our contract is over in this lifetime. So it's safe to navigate. It's safer to step forward from that traumatic event if it had to do with death. If your traumatic event has to do with, relationship dynamics, I talk a lot about my mother, and I had like a rough patch in our relationship, and now she's passed on, and not feeling too much trauma over the death. I mean, that was traumatic, but a lot of that trauma wasn't around her death. That trauma was around being loved, being worthy of her love, or her being proud of me. So now those psychic abilities help you see the relationship dynamics and how we were karmically brought together, and the lessons that we learn and how we learn lessons through our ancestors. And so you could see that in a different light and find peace with that by having these psychic abilities. Here's another great way that psychic abilities help with healing trauma, because why? You're working with angels. I mean, you're literally working with healing beings. You're in this energy now. You're in an energetic space when you're using your abilities, and you're calling on these angels. Can regular people that don't have psychic abilities call on angels? Yes. But when you have your psychic abilities, you're working directly with these beings. You're calling upon them. You're asking them, and they're communicating with you. Maybe I've had students have create new healing modalities by working with spirit. Things that haven't never been here on planet Earth are now here because somebody has psychic abilities, are bringing in healing modalities. So working with the angels, working with the light beings, this is all healing trauma. The other thing too is these psychic abilities and working with spirit. I say this all the time. I always say, you can't learn what you learn from spirit out of a book. You can't. It's like you become this whole conduit for new knowledge to come in. And as you work with spirit with your psychic abilities, it stacks onto each other. You come to an awareness, right? So, for example, you're seeing 1111 at first. You develop your psychic abilities, and then you're like, wow, I can't believe that I could read this person's energy, right? And then you get these visions, and you're like, wow, I can't believe that I see her child that's coming in 3 years from now, right? And then you're like, wow, I can't believe I could do those things. And then you come to this place where you have this greater awareness of how the universe works. And you're like, how do I know that? It's because you've opened up those receptors and you've got a new knowledge that comes in. And then as you solidify that knowledge and you're like, this is true to me now. And then spirit is like, oh, yay. So you've gotten to this level. And those of you guys that can't see me or just listening to the audio, I'm like putting my hand up, and then you get one more level up and one more level up. Is because once you get to this new awareness of knowledge, spirit's like, oh, yay. Now we know that you have this knowledge base. So we're going to tell you something else that's going to blow your mind, and you're going to sit with it. And then you're going to be like, oh my God, that's how the universe works. Oh my God, that's what thought does. Like you have this greater awareness of like manifestation, or thought, or the science behind molecules, quantum physics. Like you get this knowledge that you never had access to before when you work with your psychic abilities. Developing your psychic abilities literally changes your brain. It literally changes your brain, people. The chemicals, the way it functions, the chemicals that it releases. You start using more than 10%. Most people only use 10%, not even that, maybe only 1%. I might have my things wrong. The maximum is 10% of their brain. You activate parts of your brain that you've never used before. So you start using a greater, larger area of your brain. And you start having more peace because you have more clarity, because you're thinking clearer, because you're not getting distractions. Your chemicals aren't all out of whack. And you're using parts of your brain that other people don't have access to. And this is also why you have this greater awareness and this greater chance to heal from past traumas and this greater solidity to move forward in your life confidently and trusting yourself that everything's okay and feeling safer and standing firm in who you are. It's a beautiful, beautiful experience. So if you haven't yet developed your psychic abilities and you're wanting to change your life, this is a non-traditional way to do it. Most people think developing their psychic abilities is so that they can simply do readings or just to do it for fun. But what comes out of it is life-changing and life-altering. And when you change your life and when you heal from your trauma, you're healing all your ancestors' trauma and you're healing generations ahead of you trauma. Somebody was on the podcast recently and she was talking about mice, and they went through some training with some smell or something, and they found out that it was like 16 generations later that certain smell was still affecting mice that were born 16 generations later. So when you do this work, right, and it sounds hokey maybe to some people, developing psychic abilities to heal trauma and to have a better life, but it's exactly the truth and it's exactly what happened. And I've seen hundreds of my students come through my programs and mentor with me, and have watched their lives completely change and be so much richer for it. So if you are wanting to have these experiences, then you're definitely going to want to look into working with me in my Awaken program or as your one-to-one mentor. So I'm sending you guys all up. I hope you love this episode. Please share it with everyone that needs to be healing from their trauma.